The CSA has been around a while now, and changes have been implemented over the years. In this updated review of the CSA, we will cover the history of the CSA, the goals of the CSA initiative, what it's all about, including the 7 basics and the scoring system, and finally, how it affects you. It should be noted, the CSA is a work in progress, and regulators are continually tweaking and improving the system to make it fair for all. The information in this program is current as of the published date, and any new changes implemented by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration should be discussed by company management. On to the training. When we talk about where the CSA came from, we have to look back at the history of initiatives put forth by the DOT and the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. The chart here shows the year at the bottom and number of fatalities per 100 million vehicle miles traveled along the left. As you can see on the graph, commercial motor vehicle fatalities peaked in 1979. 5 years later, the roadside inspection program began. The result was a significant year-over-year drop in fatalities for nearly a decade. In the early 90s, the fatality statistics began to level off. In 1999, the PRISM SafeStat online program was initiated, which aimed to increase the efficiency and effectiveness of federal and state safety efforts through a more accurate process for targeting the highest risk carriers. This allowed for a more efficient allocation of scarce resources for compliance reviews and roadside inspections, but the rate flattened out through the mid-2000s. One of the issues that the DOT and the Federal Motor Carriers faced was a limited number of federal and state investigators compared to a large number of carriers. In fact, the Federal Motor Carriers regulates approximately 725,000 interstate and foreign-based truck and bus companies, and with compliance reviews that were labor-intensive, they estimate they were only able to reach less than 2%, or approximately 12,000 of the total carrier population annually. That's potentially a lot of bad apples slipping through the system. The DOT once again decided that they needed a more agile and efficient program. That brings us to where we are today. The CSA started as the Comprehensive Safety Analysis of 2010 and was rolled out to several states to test the operation system. Initial results showed that the CSA 2010 was able to reach 3 times the number of carriers from the prior system. Today the name CSA 2010 has been changed to simply CSA, or Compliance, Safety, Accountability. So what exactly is the CSA? Well, it is, quote, the FMCSA's data-driven safety compliance and enforcement program designed to improve safety and prevent commercial motor vehicle crashes, injuries, and fatalities. This program consists of 3 core components: the safety measurement system, interventions, and safety fitness determinations, all which we will look at in just a moment. But if we were to summarize the true nature of the program, it would probably be better stated as a system to help keep roadways safer and get the bad drivers and carriers off of the roadways. Now that may sound a little harsh at first, but we think you would have to agree that when it comes to safety, if a company or driver wants to cut corners, it puts the rest of us who are trying to do things right in danger. Those companies and drivers have no business being in this business. One of the biggest changes from the old online SafeStat program is the implementation of the SMS, or Safety Measurement System. The SMS design builds on the lessons learned from using SafeStat for compliance review prioritization. However, it also identifies specific types of unsafe behaviors that the drivers and carriers exhibit, including on-road and roadside safety-based violations, state report crashes, and Federal Motor Carrier Census. It then quantifies that information into 7 basics, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Another big change is the safety fitness determination, which is tied to the SMS results. Past measurement systems were based solely on on-site compliance review results. But now, your company's safety evaluation is based on numerous things, including on-road performance, and identifies which type of intervention, if any, is required. In essence, the CSA is used to obtain more relevant data on all carriers and drivers, and from that information, begin to proactively intervene with those companies that are not complying with the safety rules. The visual on the screen will give you a better idea of what exactly that means. As you and your company goes about its day and your trucks go through roadside and on-road inspections, if you receive no violations, your status remains in the green and no intervention is required. But as violations begin to enter the system, they're quantified in the SMS point system through the 7 basics, which we'll talk about next. But at a certain point, your company's score, when measured against all companies in the same grouping, may constitute an intervention, indicated here by a yellow light. Interventions. An intervention starts with early contact, which may include a warning letter outlining the possible consequences of continued safety problems, and targeted roadside inspections, meaning simply that your company is now on the radar. When you go through permanent and temporary roadside inspections, don't be surprised to find that your trucks will be targeted for more comprehensive inspections. If the initial intervention doesn't improve your company's score, you would then find yourself under the next level of intervention, which is investigation. There are 3 levels of investigation under the CSA. First is the off-site, whereas you may be required to submit documents such as drug testing records to the FMCSA. The next level is focused on-site investigation, where agents come on site to target specific problem areas, such as maintenance records. This may be selected when 1 or 2 alerts in the basics exist. The last investigation is comprehensive on-site. Your company may garner this full-fledged intervention after continually alerted basics, worsening basics in 3 or more areas, or the company has a fatal crash or complaints. The final step in the intervention process is the follow-on. When safety alerts are not dealt with by company management, first, a cooperative safety plan, or CSP, may be required where the carrier and the federal motor carriers create a joint plan to address the underlying safety performance problems. Additional steps would include a notice of violation, requiring the carrier to provide evidence of corrective action, a notice of claim, where civil penalties may be assessed, and last, but the most serious, operations out of service order, requiring the carrier to cease all motor vehicle operations. A rather new inclusion into the interventions is what is called acute and critical violations. If a carrier has been found with 1 or more acute and/or critical violations within the past 12 months during an investigation, the carrier will receive an alert in the corresponding basics. The SMS uses both the basic percentiles and acute and critical violations to highlight safety performance issues within each basic and prioritize carriers for interventions. So what are these violations? An acute violation, also known as a one-time occurrence violation, is triggered by noncompliance discovered during an investigation that is so severe that immediate corrective action is required. Examples of acute violations are using a disqualified driver or using a driver known to have tested positive for a controlled substance. A critical violation, also known as a pattern of occurrence violation, is triggered by a pattern of noncompliance related to the carrier's management or operational controls that is found during an investigation. A carrier must meet the following criteria for a critical violation to affect the basic prioritization status. Violations are discovered in at least 10% of the carrier's records checked during an investigation, and out of these records, a pattern of violations, i.e. more than one occurrence, is found. Examples of critical violations are false reports on the record of duty status and failing to maintain a driver disqualification file on each driver employed. A complete list of acute and critical violations can be found in Appendix A. We've seen how the CSA uses violations to affect the company's level of intervention, but let's now look a bit closer at what makes up the scoring system and how those are used in the 7 basics. As we said before, when your company receives violations, for example through inspections or crashes,
Each of those violations are placed into a basic. The basic data is then converted into a quantifiable measure or point system. But what is the basic and how is it used? BASIC stands for Behavior Analysis and Safety Improvement Categories. The 7 basics used to collect measurable violations include unsafe driving, including things like speeding, reckless driving, improper lane changes, inattention, or no seatbelts. Crash indicator. This includes a history of crash involvement. Hours of service compliance, including non-compliance with hours of service regulations, including logbooks. Vehicle maintenance, including brakes, lights, defects, and failure to make required repairs. Controlled substances and alcohol, the use and/or possession of controlled substances or alcohol. Hazardous materials compliance, includes leaking containers, improper packaging, and/or placarding. And finally, driver fitness, including invalid license, medically unfit to operate a commercial motor vehicle, etc. Different violations that fall under each of these 7 basics have a different point total given based on how likely and how often the given infraction is to cause a serious accident, with 1 being the least severe and 10 being the most severe. It's important to understand that each of the 7 basics are analyzed separately, meaning that points assigned for violations are only for the specific category it falls under, and your company does not have an overall score, just a score for each basic. In other words, you could be in the clear for unsafe driving, but still need intervention in vehicle maintenance. As an example, let's say your company has no current violations, but one day at a roadside inspection you're hit with a power steering violation, but the vehicle is not put out of service. The total basic point total for that violation is a 6. Something we've not yet discussed is time weight. Under the CSA, the weight of violations from 0 to 6 months multiplies the point total by 3, 6 to 12 months by 2, and 12 to 24 months by 1. So with this in mind, if we take our first violation of 6 and multiply that by the time weight, we get a total of 18. Let's now assume that another driver in your company gets hit the next month with a violation 393.47 or inadequate brake linings and is put out of service. Looking at the chart, the violation carries a weight of 4, but because this is an out of service violation, you add an additional 2 points, giving you a 6. You again multiply that by the time weight and get another 18. We now have 2 violations in the system, the first for 18 points and the second for 18 points, giving us a total of 36. At this point, if we were to go on to the FMCSA's website and check your company's score, you might see something like this. In our case, we see a 27.7% under vehicle maintenance. This simply means that your company is performing worse than 27.7% or better than 72.3% of all companies in your safety event group. And speaking of safety event groups, this is the group that your company is being measured against based on similar number of inspections and crashes, which you can find here. So, we're performing worse than 27.7% of companies in our group, but what does that really mean? It's simply a gauge to know how you're doing, but no interventions are required until your company hits what are called thresholds. Thresholds are the percentages at which your company will be targeted for intervention. A list of thresholds for hazmat companies are shown here. Note that these percentages vary slightly based on the type of carrier you are. For instance, since consequences of passenger or hazmat materials crashes are typically more severe, lower thresholds are in place. Remember that your company's percentage score is not based on, say, a test score where you only miss 27%, but rather how you rank according to companies in your safety event group. With that said, it's possible for your company's basic percentages to go up or down without even getting another violation. Why? 2 reasons. First is the time weight of violations. Other companies in your safety event group may have scores that are dropping off because of the time elapsed since the last violation. Remember that first violation you received for 6 points? If 6 months have passed, the point total is only 6 times 2 for a total of 12 instead of the 18. The second reason is for what's called normalization. The more clean inspections you have, let's say for vehicle inspections, the better the vehicle inspection score will become. Although clean inspections have a rather small impact on scores, it's still an important part of the CSA. We've already seen how the CSA initiative can affect carriers. As percentages in the 7 basics move past the acceptable threshold limits, interventions begin. Whether it's a warning letter or targeted roadside inspections, or for the most extreme offenders, an unfit to operate order. But how does this affect you, the individual, working for the carrier? Let's look at some of the most frequently asked questions to find out how.
What is the CSA driver safety enforcement process? It provides the federal motor carriers with the tools to identify commercial drivers with safety performance problems and address the issues. It enables safety investigators to identify drivers with poor safety histories over a 3-year period who work for carriers that have been identified as requiring a CSA investigation. If the investigation results verify the driver violations, the federal carriers can take an enforcement action against that driver, such as a notice of violation or a notice of claim. So if I have recently changed carriers, my violations go with me? Yes, your violations stay with you for a 3-year rolling period. Carrier scores are not affected by violations you obtained with a prior employer. What kinds of driver safety performance data is CSA looking at? The program focuses on driver enforcement for serious rule violations, such as driving while disqualified, driving without a valid CDL, making a false entry on a medical certificate, or committing numerous hours of service violations. Do tickets that drivers receive while operating their personal vehicles impact the SMS? No, only while driving large commercial motor vehicles. What is the PSP, or Pre-Employment Screening Program? This program is voluntary and allows carriers to assess an individual's commercial motor vehicle driver's safety violation and crash history as a pre-employment condition. Motor carriers may request a driver's information for the purpose of pre-employment screening only, and drivers must give their consent. The profile contains 3 years of inspection data and 5 years of crash data. Does CSA assign safety ratings to individual commercial drivers, and will the federal motor carrier remove me from my job for violations? No and no. The federal motor carrier does not have the authority to take those actions. What steps do I take if I believe there's a false violation on my or my carrier's record? The Federal Motor Carrier website has a section called Data Queues, where you or your carrier can dispute current violations. So those are some of the frequently asked questions. But the reality is this: if you work for a carrier and are generating violations consistently over time, you're hurting the carrier and ultimately yourself. The carrier's basic scores will be negatively affected, and if you're the source of eventual interventions, you may find yourself looking for a new carrier. And then when you go to that next carrier and they see those violations through the PSP, you may find that you'll be looking for an entirely new line of work. That's the purpose of the CSA. Remember what we said at the start: the goal is to get the bad carriers and drivers off the road. So what can you do to protect yourself? Well, obviously be safe and follow the regulations. It's a good idea when you have time to go use the data queue system to check for any potentially erroneous violations on your driving record, such as crash and inspection reports. Always conduct a thorough pre- and post-trip inspection. We'll say it again: drive safe and follow the regulations.
There's a lot of information that goes into the CSA program, and to dissect the entire methodology could take us several days. But from a training standpoint, we've covered a lot of important information and have hopefully helped you better understand the process and importance of following the regulations, and more importantly, keeping everyone safer. Thanks for watching.